satisfied in a symbol of our appreciation to Lemon's honor and faithful service.
Mismor le David, Adonai roi lo echsar, Binot eshe yarbitzeni al me menuchot yanachaleni, Nafshi yishovev, Yanacheni v'magle tzedek lema'an shemo, Gam ki helech begetz al mavet, Lo yirara ki ata imadi, Shiftecha mishantecha hemayanachamuni. Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged tsurirai. Di shanta vashemen roshi kosiri vaya. Ach tov chesed yirdifuni koyamei chayai vishaveti beveit Adonai leorech yamim. I've chanted for you the words of our 23rd Psalm. When we are faced with challenging moments, moments which tear at our hearts, we often turn to the psalmist. And so I ask you now to recite these words with me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we will remember him. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we will remember him. In the opening buds and in the rebirth of spring, we will remember him. In the blueness of sky and in the warmth of summer, we will remember him. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we will remember him. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we will remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, we will remember him. When we are lost and sick at heart, we will remember him. When we have joys to share, we will remember him. So long as we live, he too will live. He is now a part of us, as we remember Paul Goldman. To his sons, Jeff and Howard, also to Kathleen and Barb, and to his grandchildren, Matt, Jody, Joel, Megan, Merrill, Jonathan, and Eli, and also to his 7 great-grandchildren, and to all of the members of the family, and to so many dear friends. We've joined together today not only to remember, but also to celebrate the life of your beloved Paul. We're taught that birth is a beginning, and death a destination, and life is a journey from childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion and then, perhaps, to wisdom, from weakness to strength, or strength to weakness, and often back again. From health to sickness, and back we pray to health again. From offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, and life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage to life everlasting. Paul's journey of more than 95 years began here in Cleveland. He was born on October 7th, 1923, to Ida and Philip Goldman. His parents were born in Chisova, Russia, which then became part of Poland following World War I. Along with his two older brothers, Benjamin and Harry, both of blessed memory, these three boys all grew up right here in Cleveland, in the famed area simply known as Kinsman. Paul enjoyed warm and loving relationships with his brothers, and in their adult years, before his brother Ben died, Ben asked Paul to watch over his daughters, Annie and Paula, and Paul took his brother's wish very seriously. Along with his nieces Annie and Paula, Paul also had two other nieces, Harry's daughters, Sally and Linda, and he loved all four of them dearly. Paul grew up enjoying a happy childhood, and the friends he made as a boy and in his teen years remained lifelong friends. These friends were among Paul's dearest treasures. He attended John Adams High School, where he was involved in many clubs and was a good and dedicated student. And following his high school graduation, Paul attended Western Reserve College for 1 year, where he studied pre-med. And then duty called, and Paul entered into the United States Army, where he served our country for 3 years as a medic in Burma, China, and India. 9 years ago, in March of 2009, I had the sad privilege of delivering the eulogy for the funeral of Hilda, the love of Paul's life. In preparing my remarks for that day, I sat with Paul and his family, and he shared his feelings and memories of Hilda. And so I share with you words that Paul told me directly. He told me that he and Hilda met when they were just 16 years old, and they met through an organization that was known as the Council Educational Alliance, and this later became known as the Jewish Community Center. Paul shared with me a story of how he and Hilda began dating, and 2 years into their courtship, he went to serve our country. He reminisced that when the war ended, he returned home to Cleveland, and he and Hilda were married in 1946 at the Temple on the Heights, just around the corner from here, by Rabbi Rudolph Rosenthal. In 1947, Jeff, you entered into the world. And in 1951, Howard, you came into the picture as well, completing this beautiful Goldman family portrait. In their nearly 63 years of marriage, Paul and Hilda loved family and friends above all else. They enjoyed traveling and cruises and camping, and they especially loved the house they bought located in Pennsylvania, this summer place where friends and family would gather for little getaways. And those same friends, now these are friendships that lasted 80 years. Those same friends would get together to celebrate milestones and holidays. And today, at this time of year, I should also mention that they got together with these friends every New Year's Eve. Hilda and Paul frequented the theater, and in their earlier years of their marriage, they would often go out dancing. All these details and more were described to me back in 2009 by Paul himself. He described his beloved Hilda as, I'm quoting Paul now, a cute blonde with blue eyes. He said, she was special, a very sincere person, an honest friend, and an excellent wife, mother, and grandmother. After Hilda's passing, Paul missed her so much. He missed her all the time. And today I think we can take some comfort as we hope and pray that their souls are now finally reunited. Paul was a talented man, a self-taught artist. He worked for many years for Plasticoat, a company that manufactured restaurant equipment. And while his official title was advertising manager, Paul's job required him to draw, by hand, all of the ads for Plasticoat. What's done today now by computer graphics, Paul did it all with his eye in his hand. When I spoke with you, Howard, on the phone, you shared with me that your father was not just giving to his friends and his family, but he felt a strong connection to certain communities. And one of his greatest loves was to give back to the Native American community. Howard, you told me that every year your dad made donations to charities that supported Native Americans, and they, in return, would send him these little beautiful handmade pieces which so accurately represented their heritage. You said that your father was also quite devoted to the Jewish War Veterans Organization. These meant something to him. In Hebrew, we call this tikkun olam, which means repairing the world. It was his way of giving back. I want to also mention not just Howard and the remarks he shared with me, but Howard and Barb and Jeff and Kathleen. Your dad was so blessed to have wonderful sons and daughters. He was blessed to have you. All four of you, in your own special ways, you cared for him, whether in Florida or Oregon. The respect and the love that you've shown your father, especially in the more recent years, the way that you have always gone above and beyond to protect his dignity, I'll just say that the four of you are a shining example to all of us. Our tradition teaches us that words which come from the heart enter directly to the heart. And today, 3 members of the family have words in their hearts they want to share with all of us. And so first, I would like to call upon his son, Jeff.
I'd first like to say thank you for everyone who attended. Can you all hear me? Okay. Paul Goldman. Paul Goldman, my father, was a strong and quiet person. He was the ultimate nice guy. He was an intelligent, complicated, responsible family man living in the simple life. That's the way he wanted it, to live life to the fullest, his way. And he was very successful at it. As a kid growing up in the Kinsman area, he developed such a strong sense of community and friendship, and his parents instilled such a strong sense of family, and it certainly shows in the family we have today. He essentially, there was this one young lady in the neighborhood who had an attraction for it. They lived 2 streets away from each other. So the meeting at the community center was already starting to form before they got there. Because they knew each other in the neighborhood. He had a love affair, though, that was really inspirational, and it was really something to read some of the love letters that he had, and they were very, very special. and as was mentioned, Dad was in medical school and eventually went into the Army. And the thing I want to mention is that he won the Bronze Star for meritorious service in wartime. And that's something most people didn't know. And that was my father. He was not one to chime his own chain. He was not one to mention too much about his accomplishments. No one really knew that he had won that. He kept that to himself. So Dad's hobbies included such things as clay, working with clay, oil painting. He also weaving, and he liked to go golfing, which was another hobby of his. As growing up as a kid, he used to play a lot of stickball, it's the forerunner to baseball in the streets, and he just loved baseball as well. There was another side to my dad, and that was his giving, and I just remember listening to his phone calls. He'd have one. There was one person that Dad would call every chance he got to make sure that his buddy, who was a severely injured World War II veteran, felt appreciated and that he was doing okay. Whenever he could, he was calling and making sure that that individual was doing that he could connect with him. So if you ask my dad the highlights of his life, he would smile. And he would tell you he was glad to have had such good family and friends, happy to have found his soulmate, satisfied that he had jobs that provided for his family, he appreciated that he was able to enjoy many hobbies, and thrilled to have traveled around the world. But the one story I like to tell, which really shows his character, is one that occurred in January 2017. My brother Howard and I, we were taking my father on a couple plane rides to Portland. He was moving from Florida to Portland, and the fact that he wanted, at 93 years of age, to actually move to Portland just shows his flexibility and his strong constitution. And he really did have a strong constitution. He was amazing. The flight was broken up into two parts, as I mentioned. So we started to board the plane. The passengers were already there in their seats. And I had given him a hat that said World War II veteran. He was wearing it. And so the flight attendant, when she saw him, announced to the whole plane that he was a World War II veteran. And all of a sudden, the emotion and the cheering that went up were just amazing one. And it just felt really good. And, we're trying to move him with all kinds of possible calamities, and here was a great start to that trip. And it felt great. And of course, when we got to the second leg of the trip, same thing, cheering. Appreciated. They were thankful, cheering for his service. Well, when Dad sat down the first time that he heard the cheering, he looked at his two sons and he said, "Who was all that cheering for?" and of course we told them, "Well, it was you, Dad. It was you." And that's how I choose to remember my father, as a modest man who deserved applause. Dad, thank you for your service. From all those you touched, you will be missed.
Thank you. It's beautiful. Thank you, Jeff. I would now like to call on Paul's niece, Annie. Annie has words from her heart and also from the heart of her sister, Paula, who is not able to join us today, but I believe is watching via live stream. Annie?
Good morning. It's good to see you all here. My sister sent me these words, and I'd like to begin with her words, every one of them. My sister Paula could not be here with us today because she's the only one of the cousins who is not retired. And she said there would be laughter, so I should pause. My sister had a very special relationship with our Uncle Paul. Here it is in her own words. My Uncle Paul. Uncle Paul was my favorite uncle. He was my namesake. Well, not really. In actuality, we were both named for a dear elder aunt, Paulina, on my grandpa Philip's side. All my life, I pretended I was named after Uncle Paul. It was my first connection with him. My father, Ben, was Paul's older brother, and the two of them were best friends. Our families always vacationed together, camping trips to the Smoky Mountains where Daddy and Uncle Paul nearly got their toes bit off by black bears. And every Sunday, the Goldmans would caravan to Mentor Headlands for picnics and water sports. That included Howie and Jeffrey throwing dead fish at my sister and me. She has such a good memory. You always knew when you were behind Uncle Paul's car because Jeffrey and Howie could not sit still in the back seat. They were like a couple of Mexican jumping beans, bouncing up and down, up and down. Boy, those shocks were worn out. It's true, they were. Daddy and Uncle Paul talked about once a week. The conversation was always the same. How are you, Paul? Fine, Ben. How are you? Fine. What's new? Nothing. What's new with you? Nothing. Okay, talk to you next week. They did not need a lot of words. Their bond was strong. One word to describe Uncle Paul was stoic. He was born of hardy Russian and Polish stock, and this was what would propel him to his 95th year. One New Year's morning, Uncle Paul slipped on ice on his front step on Irene while trying to get his plane dealer. Newspaper, for those of you who don't know the reference. He hobbled back in the house and wrapped his foot. It would be days later when my sister Annie was visiting him. She noticed the bloody foot and demanded he go to the doctor. In fact, he had broken his foot. Paul did not feel a thing. It turned out I, Paula, was the last cousin in Cleveland. The boys had moved south and west to Florida and Portland. My parents had departed. And Uncle Paul was my only living relative. We became a party of two. We went to dinner at Applebee's, Bob Evans, and Jack's, and I'm sure people wondered about us. I would check on him a few times a week. We had longer conversations than he and my dad did. Time came that Jeffrey wanted his dad to come and live with him and Kathleen in Florida. It was time for Uncle Paul to stop living on his own. He was very adamant about not wanting to leave his forever home at 1272 Irene. Well, a deal was struck. Uncle Paul agreed to check out Tampa if I would come along for the ride. What a crew we were. My cousins, my cat, Precious. I do not go anywhere without my cat. My uncle, my kitty, and me all hopped up on tranquilizers for the life-altering journey. My cousins were the chaperones. Uncle Paul was already well into his 80s when he made his first move. He settled into his lovely new home with 360 degrees of ocean and Gulf of Mexico views. The new home even took them on a boat rides to McDonald's. Having my favorite uncle in Florida changed my life too. I came down to Florida and settled on the other coast. This afforded me a few more visits with him, and time with him together. Well, we all know how the story ends. From Florida, he went to Portland to live with Howie and Barbara and all of his grandchildren and great-grandchildren in the last decade. In the last decade of his life, my uncle globetrotted from Ohio to Florida to Portland, and at age 95, he took his last flight to Cleveland to rest eternally next to Aunt Hilda. As I said, all my life I pretended I was named after Uncle Paul. This helped in his declining years. I would say, "Uncle Paul, what's your name?" "What's my name?" "I'm your namesake." Between the two of us, we would figure it out. My sister went to Portland less than a month ago. I had the priceless gift of one last phone call, and it was beautiful. She didn't say that, I did. He appeared to know who I was, and Annie said there was a smile on his face. Who could ask for more? My uncle was a trooper. He was the last of his generation. He deserves to rest in peace with his beloved Hilda, and I will love you forever, Uncle Paul. Those are my sister's words, and my own feelings echo hers with all these memories. When Jeffrey read it, so he wouldn't repeat during his eulogy, he said, "This is so good because the kids will see Uncle Paul that they had not seen, the Uncle Paul of our growing up, of our childhood." And I did not know that he had promised my father to look after us, because he always looked after us. Every time, from the time I can remember, he and the family were there, the boys and Hilda. And when my father passed, and my mom was on her own, and Paula lived there, they called him at any time, day or night, before Dad passed, when Dad fell, and Uncle Paul would come in the middle of the night to pick him up because my mother and my sister couldn't. He was there all my life. This gentle, kind, warm man with such an even temperament. He was beloved of us, and may he rest in peace with Aunt Hilda. Bless you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Annie. I mentioned earlier that he was blessed not only with 7 grandchildren, but, as we would say in Yiddish, kinahora, 7 great-grandchildren. His granddaughter Jody now has words to share with us.
As a dear friend said a few moments ago to me, we had Grandpa Paul an awfully long time. It's not often you get to round your 40th birthday and still be able to say Grandpa's here. We were very blessed. Watching my grandpa these last few years, I've been struck by a few things. At the end of our lives, the conflict we've experienced falls away. And what remains are our stories, shared and remembered, even if they're only remembered for a short time. But the feelings, the love lives on. The love is a gift that ripples through time. You know what else is a gift? Grandchildren. Me. I'm a gift. Because grandchildren, we're the ones who look on adoringly with children's eyes and grant our elders immunity. Immunity from all their fallible human parts. I saw my grandpa through the eyes of a child. I saw his big, capable hands that built, hands that created. I saw the big, cuddly belly of a teddy bear that gave all-encompassing hugs to his small granddaughter. And I can still feel his rough, almost leathery, elephant-sized ears on my tiny cheek. And I saw the unabashed love of a man for his wife. As a young girl, I would travel out to Cleveland and spend a week with my grandparents. And each time I would visit, I would sit with my grandmother and we would look at photo albums. I loved looking through their albums. Grandma would sit with me and she would tell me their stories, And they were people. They weren't cartoons or characters on the screen. They were real people with strengths and weaknesses. And I knew they were people who made mistakes. But to my 8-year-old eyes, they were photo albums that told a fairy tale. They told of a love of teenagers, a love that survived war, a love that survived growing up and growing old. They told the story of two people who, for whatever reason, loved each other forever. Their story was the story that comes after Happily Ever After. And it was through their albums and their story and the story of all their friends that I learned what it meant to make lifelong friends and to find a partner in this life. They didn't really ever show it to me in big displays, but I noticed the small things. Grandpa quietly did all kinds of things to make your day a little better. This week I've heard, and I know others have thought, of so many little caring gestures. Checking your car before you took a trip. A phone call to check in. A pat on the back at just the right moment. Letting you know Seder isn't going to last forever. It's almost over. And how many times did he run to the kitchen to get Grandma a cookie? Those little things were his way of saying he cared. He didn't always get things right. He was merely human after all. But the culmination of his actions carved a path. In my final goodbye, my grandpa couldn't remember who I was. But his hug and his gentle kiss were unchanged. The memories were gone, but his kindness and his love remained. Gentle, kind, loving. These are the words that I will use to remember my grandpa. And these are the traits that I associate with my dad. They're the traits that I hope to emulate, the traits I hope to share with my children. Because much like my grandpa, I won't always get it right. I just hope that when the memories fade, that I can leave loving ripples, like those that have come from the generations before me. Thank you.
Wow, Jody. I know. Thank you seems inadequate. That was exquisite. Thank you so much to you and to Annie and Jeff. Friends, we take a moment of silent prayer as we ask God to now accept Paul's soul. And as you are able, I invite you to rise for the memorial prayer El Malei Rachamim. El Malei Rachamim, shochen במרומים, המשימנוך נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מסעירים. את נשמת יקירנו שהלך לעולמו בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו. אנא ברחמים אסתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים ותתרור בתרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו וינוח בשלום על משכבו ונאמר אמן. O merciful God, who dwells on high, who is full of compassion, grant perfect rest beneath the shelter of your divine presence among the holy and pure, who shines as the brightness of the firmament. To our dear departed Paul Goldman, who has gone now to his eternal home, may Paul's soul be bound up in the bonds of eternal life, and grant that his memory inspire all of us to noble and consecrated living. And to this we say, Amen. Please be seated. Just a couple of quick announcements to share with everyone. Our service will continue at the Mount Olive Cemetery, and following the interment, the family will receive visitors until 8 p.m. this evening at Jeff's home, which is in Brecksville. The address is 6885 Carriage Hill Drive. Jeff lives in Building E, number 72, and the instructions are, Jeff, if I have this correct?
We have directions when people are exiting the chapel. We have
As Mr. Berkowitz has indicated, there are some directions, perhaps a map, but also you should look for the open garage door. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but look for the open garage door, Building E, and the family would love to have you come by and visit with them. They'll be doing that until 8 p.m. this evening. Anyone who wishes to make a donation, a contribution in memory of Paul, the family suggested that you might consider the Jewish War Veterans Fund, specifically to the World War II veterans. On behalf of Howard, Jeff, and their entire family, we thank you for your love and support today.